This part 4 video explains God's judgment on murderers in God's church and its righteousness. Hello friends, this is Unmasked Truth with Harmanjit Saini, where I provide unique analysis of world events based on the unmasked truth that after surrender, Germany continued World War II clandestinely and became a killing machine. I also provide true news that you will find nowhere else. First, I would like to make a small correction to my part 3 video concerning my statement about my church pastor Doug Wendt in the Tampa congregation I attended as supposed to be the bishop of my soul. All leaders in God's church have made themselves my enemies and will not pass up an opportunity to criticize me as a layman with no training in the scriptures, so that no one should pay attention to my messages on prophecy and other teachings on religion. They will criticize me for calling the church pastor as the bishop of my soul, when only Jesus Christ is the true bishop of every human being's soul, as stated by Peter the Apostle in 1 Peter chapter 2 verse 25, which states, "For you were as sheep going astray, but are now returned unto the shepherd and bishop of your souls." However, even ministers in the church are referred to as bishops in Philippians 1 verse 1, 1 Timothy 3 verses 1 to 2, and Titus 1 verse 7. They represent Jesus Christ and are in no way responsible for our spiritual development. That is the sense I meant the church pastor being the bishop of my soul, though Jesus Christ is the true bishop and shepherd of our souls. Now back to my message. In part 1 of this series of videos, I provided a long list of murderers in God's church who are top leaders and ministers. I also briefly discussed what deceived and motivated the topmost leaders in God's church to murder their own members who were under their care. In part 2 video, I discussed how top leaders in God's church were deceived in a conspiracy by German masqueraders in God's church, with German masquerader national leadership headed by Charlie Munger and his general Warren Buffett, with day-to-day execution being carried out by the lieutenants who carry out the murders. In part 3 video, I explained how the murders were actually committed in two ways. The date of April 19, 2019 was chosen to carry out the murders worldwide in God's church, when the church would be celebrating the feast called the Night to be Much Observed. This feast immediately follows the Passover. The Jews actually call this feast the Passover and celebrate it at the same time as God's church does, with a special meal. During this feast, families get together in groups of 10 to 40 or even 50 to have a special meal. When church members and families get together in small groups of 10 to 15, they usually have a potluck dinner. When they gather in large numbers, such as 30 to 40, usually a catered meal is enjoyed. I was the intended murder victim in a gathering of 10 of us on April 19, 2019, and the intended victim on April 15, 2022, when a catered meal was served for a group of about 40 to 50 of us. Usually, in the small group setting, the conspirators came in early before the intended victim, so that they all knew which was the poisoned dish that was brought in. The intended murder victim would not know which the poisoned dish was and would eat that food. In the case where the intended victim was disabled, he or she would be served the poisoned food. In my case, on the evening of April 19, 2019, the poison dish was brought in by a person who was not a member of the church but was introduced to me as a member from another faraway congregation of the church, which I would have never visited. There was a twofold purpose in using an outside person to bring in the poisoned food. Similar attempts had been made on my life in the past, but God protected me. German masquerader national leadership wanted to make sure that members of God's church would not be serving me good food and claiming they poisoned my food. Secondly, the outside person would verify that I had eaten the poisoned food. In the large group setting, the outside caterer would serve the dinner in such a way that some part of the meal would be served by handing it to individual guests. That would ensure that the poisoned food could be served only to the intended victim and not to anyone else. On April 15, 2022, the outside caterer made sure that I was served poisoned food. She herself cut the meat for me from a different slab. Then some members handed me my dessert. I let them do it because I was not suspecting anything. But that dessert was poisoned and also the meat handed to me by the caterer. There is also the likelihood that some members wore explosives on their body and sat near me like suicide bombers to blow me up. With God's grace, I survived this attempt on my life also. In the large group setting, 30 to 50 people wanted to claim full credit from the German masquerader side for murder by murdering just one person. We too will give each and every one of them full credit for murder, though only one person was murdered, to fully qualify for the punishment, which is for them and their families to be exterminated. The primary responsibility of God's church in these end times is to be a watchman to the house of Israel, as described by Ezekiel the prophet in Ezekiel 3 verses 17 to 19. House of Israel is primarily America and the British Commonwealth nations, who are modern descendants of the northern kingdom of ancient Israel. But the spiritual house of Israel is God's church. Therefore, there has to be someone in the church fulfilling the watchman role. Ezekiel says, beginning in verse 17 of chapter 3, Son of man, I have made you a watchman unto the house of Israel. Therefore hear the word at my mouth and give them warning from me. When I say unto the wicked, you shall surely die, and you give him not warning, nor speak to warn the wicked from his way to save his life, the same wicked man shall die in his iniquity, but his blood will I require at your hand. Yet if you warn the wicked, and he turn not from his wickedness, nor from his wicked way, he shall die in his iniquity, but you have delivered your soul. This requirement to issue a warning is concerning the wicked, and certainly those who have committed murder of their own brethren in the faith in God's church are richly deserving of the label wicked. To understand how diabolically wicked these people are, their manner is so friendly that those who made repeated attempts on my life I thought were my very best friends in the world, in the church. Someday I hope to receive the billions of dollars our side of the government has kept on my behalf. I have often contemplated about rewarding who I thought were my best friends and had helped me out in some way, or just been very friendly with me by giving me the benefit of their company and doing some things together. These were the people I thought should receive the maximum reward from me so that they become millionaires. And some of them have already received substantial sums of money from my funds. While I was thinking these loving and caring thoughts about them, they were making repeated attempts to take away my life. That's how wicked and treacherous they are, just like the Germans. Someone in God's church has to issue a warning to top leaders, other ministers and members who have committed murder of their own church members to demonstrate their commitment to the German and German masquerader side. The Worldwide Church of God, now called Grace Communion International or GCI, went astray after the death of Mr. Herbert W. Armstrong on January 16, 1986, when his successor Joseph W. Tkach Sr. renounced all the doctrines God had restored through Mr. Armstrong. 3 men then issued the warning to the church and individual members to get back on track. The 3 men were Jules Dervais Sr., Gerald R. Flurry, head of the Philadelphia Church of God, and David C. Pack, head of the Restored Church of God. Mr. Gervais Jr. does not have any significant preaching work, so he cannot reach all those who have committed murder in God's church. Gerald Flurry and David Pack have joined the murderers. Therefore, they cannot issue a warning to the murderers and need a warning themselves. United Church of God, a worldwide association, and Living Church of God do not criticize or comment on other Church of God organizations. Therefore, they will not issue a warning to the murderers. And the astounding sad fact is that every hired employee, including all the top leaderships in these churches, have committed murder. Therefore, all of them need a warning themselves. Since none of them can issue a warning to themselves and to the other wicked to repent of their evil, I am the only one left to issue a warning to all of them. The number of people who have participated in this evil is absolutely staggering. I knew that a majority of members in my church, the United Church of God, were German masqueraders, who are people of German ancestry living in the United States, Canada, and other white countries. Some were tares or infiltrators who do not believe what the church believes in the church, whereas others were genuine members. Tares are generally indistinguishable from genuine members. I thought many members with German last names were Jews, but the shocking discovery I have made is that most all of them are Germans, but were trying to masquerade as Jews by signaling to me with nods in my presence and making me believe so. They have also convinced virtually all the minority members in the church to join up with the masquerader side to avoid becoming victims of the German alliance that, according to prophecy, will be victorious over the United States and British Commonwealth nations and unleash the Great Tribulation. Thus, it's quite likely that almost all the minority members in the Church of God, that's African Americans, Hispanics, those with from Caribbean countries, Philippines, and other Asian countries, who are living in the United States, Canada, and Europe, have participated in the murders. The punishment for this wicked crime of murder in God's church, as well as in America, British Commonwealth nations, and Israel, is not to be decided by any human government or a prophet or leader in God's church. God Almighty has already made that judgment through prophecy. As I described in part 2 video in this series, that judgment was prophesied by Ezekiel the prophet and very ably interpreted by Gerald R. Frey of the Philadelphia Church of God, who have also joined the masquerader side by committing murder. I fully concur with this interpretation. Rather than write the interpretation in my own words, I'll simply quote Gerald Flurry from his booklet Ezekiel the End Time Prophet, chapter 7. And to the others, that is, other angels, he, called angel, said in my hearing, Go after him through the city, and smite. Let not your eyes spare, neither have pity. Slay utterly old and young, both maid, that is, young unmarried girls, and little children, including infants, and women. But come not near any upon whom is the mark, that is, members of God's church who sigh and cry for the abominations and murders committed in God's church and in America and British Commonwealth nations. And the narrative continues, and begin at my sanctuary, which is a symbol for God's church in the end time. Then they began in the ancient men. Ancient men means leaders, that elders are the top leaders in God's church, which were before the house, meaning God's house, symbol for God's true church in the end time. This is from Ezekiel 9 verses 5 to 6. God calls the slaughtering angels to begin at his sanctuary, that is God's church today. This is an extermination of men, women, and children. No one is left out of the slaughter God pronounced when compared to other slaughters described in the Bible where young women and female children were saved alive. Please see part 2 video for more details. Those who receive God's mark are to be fully protected supernaturally by God. Who can trust God's purpose even in the worst time of suffering and turmoil in the world? My plea to members of God's church, or for that matter anyone in America, British Commonwealth nations, and Israel and Northwestern Europe who have not joined the masquerader side is to not do so. Because if you do, God has already described your punishment, and we will do our best to carry it out. Later, God will punish off the remnants who survive, if any. This is God's judgment. I would not change one bit, even if any murderers plead for mercy for their children. Anyone who overrules God's will does it at his own guaranteed peril. Let me explain a bit further why I praise God for his righteous judgment. In the United States, attempts on my life began to be made first by members in God's church in 1982, less than a year after I arrived in the United States. I believe my pastor general in Chicago, Roy Halladay, also participated in the attempts. What a horrible thing to say! Attempts on a man's life being made by pastors and members of God's true church who are to obey God's sixth commandment to not murder. From then on, attempts have been made regularly, mainly by having me poisoned. Some tried it in other ways. All such people in the church hope to be fabulously rewarded financially. Now put yourselves in my shoes. If attempts had been made on your life so that the would-be murderer hoped to become rich with the financial rewards offered by German masqueraders' national leadership, be able to marry and build his own family, how would you feel while your bright chance of having such a life would be snuffed out? How would you like the thunderer to be treated? Now imagine if the intended victim was your son and daughter. You would want to snuff out the life of such a murderer. Now imagine how God feels about someone murdering his begotten son, whom he hopes will one day be born as his literal eternal son, so that the murderer may become rich and build his own family. When you're trying to have built your house on evil, God's judgment is to destroy your whole house, meaning the entire family. As I said earlier, attempts on my life by church members began first to be made in 1982. I arrived in the USA in August 1981 as a PhD student. By 2023, hundreds of ministers and members in God's church have made such attempts. Most knew about the earlier attempts on my life and knew that God had protected me. Since they had no fear of God, and the same and even new people continue to make attempts at each and every opportunity. Some have probably made 30 to 40 or even more attempts on my life by poisoning my food, coffee, and drinks. That is how much these people despised me and did very little regard to me. As a self respecting man, I can have no respect for them. In my opinion, they do not deserve to be forgotten, and God's judgment should be administered to them. Beginning near the end of 1990, Germans first informed the world that I had been appointed to the office of a prophet by God. That seemed to have spurred more attempts on my life rather than more respect for me. Top leadership in the church was fully aware of what was going on. In 1993, I went to Germany for the Feast of Tabernacles and spent 10 to 8 days there. The Germans made attempts on my life in Germany. When I came back safe and sound to the United States, Joseph Tlakac Sr., Pastor General of the Worldwide Church of God at that time, was astonished. The headquarters leaders were thus fully aware of how God had been protecting me. My attempts on my life still continued. How can such people be forgiven who have mocked God for 40 years by trying to murder someone whom God has appointed as his prophet? They have no excuse for continuing their evil, as they witnessed numerous times that I had been protected. Many among them are totally dedicated to Satan's diabolical and cunning murderous ways. That's why attempts at murder continued. Then around 1998, God made my face shine in public places and in the church, just as Moses' face shone, as described in Exodus 34 verses 29 to 35. About 500 ministers and members witnessed the phenomenon in Philadelphia Church of God. About 800 to 1,000 top leaders, ministers, and members witnessed it at a Feast of Tabernacles in United Church of God. Others who witnessed it include the small Living Church of God congregation I attended in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the Worldwide Church of God, also called GCI now, congregation I attended in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and 3 persons in Restored Church of God when I tried to visit and tour the headquarters campus in Wadsworth, Ohio, which they did not allow. After many had witnessed my face shining like Moses' face, and ministers in God's church then knew that I had been appointed to the office of a prophet spoken of by Moses in Deuteronomy 18. When I doubted whether I had been appointed to that office because I thought Jesus Christ had already fulfilled the prophecy and role as mentioned by Peter the Apostle in Acts 3 verses 20 to 23 and by Stephen the Martyr in Acts 7:37, ministers in United Church of God assured me that I had been appointed to that office. Despite all this, many ministers and members in God's church have had no regard for God or me and have multiplied their attempts to take away my life. Thus they have utterly despised me. For those who have right to snuff out the life of the person that God indicated in many ways that He had chosen him to do work with me. I had claimed in my writings that God had delivered some messages to me through angels. Because Mr. Armstrong, through whom God founded the modern era of His church, the Worldwide Church of God, had stated many times in our homes that God does not speak personally or through angels with human beings to deliver messages. Almost the entire ministry thought I was demon influenced and that demons were delivering messages to me. No one is given a license to make attempts on the life of a person whom someone suspects of being demon influenced, but who is in no way harming any member of society or the church. In February 2016, I finally realized what God Himself had given incontrovertible proof that I have been delivered messages to me through angels. The first message delivered to me was July-August 1994 was that Sainis of India are Jews. About 4 months later, I shared that message with my church congregation pastor, ancient pastor Mr. Maceo Hampton. Then in 1998, God revealed to the late Queen Elizabeth II of the United Kingdom that I was a Jew. Thus, God used probably the most credible person on earth to elaborate the message delivered to me through an angel. Though the proof had been given to me in 1998, only in February 2016 did I realize that this was incontrovertible proof that shared with what the world in my weekly messages. After that, no minister or member of God's church had any excuse for believing that I was demon influenced because I claimed that God had delivered messages to me through His angels. I also explained that God had not communicated about His work with anyone directly or outside or through angels of 100 meet cycles or 19 years or a total of 1900 years since revealing the book of Revelation to John the Apostle, till He delivered the first message to me in 1994. I have detailed all the books that I have been appointed to the office of a prophet that Moses wrote in Deuteronomy 19 verses 1 and 5 ebooks. A prophet like Moses, available free on my religion website www.churchofgodmessage.com. Despite all these proofs that God is working through me, still the attempts on my life continue to this day. Thus, top leaders, ministers, and members in God's church have continued to mock God for more than 40 years. Perhaps you can now understand why top leaders, ministers, and members in God's church have no excuse for murdering me except that I oppose German and German masquerader ways and will not come under their boot and follow the ways of the God of the Bible. Perhaps you can also understand why I consider God's judgment on them for their conduct, that they and their family should be exterminated, to be righteous. His judgment on them is appropriate and richly deserved. God himself carried out the punishment on those who mocked Moses and challenged his authority. That story of the rebellion of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram against Moses and Aaron, and told in Numbers 16, God's judgment on the rebels is described in verses 23 to 33. And the Lord spoke unto Moses, Then tell all the people to get away from the tents of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. So Moses got up and rushed over to the tents of Dathan and Abiram, followed by the murderers of Israel. Quick, he said to people, get away from the tents of these wicked men, and don't touch anything that belongs to them. If you do, you will be destroyed for their sins. So all the people stood back from the tents of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. Then Dathan and Abiram came out and stood at the enemies of their tents, together with their wives and children and little ones. And Moses said, This is how you will know that the Lord has sent me to do all these things that I have done, for I have not done them on my own. If these men die a natural death, or if nothing unusual happens, then the Lord has not sent me. But if the Lord does something entirely new, and the ground opens up its water and swallows them and all their belongings, and they go down alive into the grave, then you will know that these men have shown contempt for God. He had hardly finished speaking the words when the ground suddenly split open between them. The earth opened its mouth and swallowed the men, along with their households and all the followers who were standing with them and everything they owned. They went down alive into the grave, along with all their belongings. The earth closed over them, and they all vanished from among the children of Israel. God's judgment on those who rebelled against Moses' appointed prophet and judge. Moses agreed with the judgment on leaders and members in God's church who have rebelled against God and sought to murder someone. He has appointed to the office of a prophet to do his work as prophesied in Ezekiel 9. His judgments are consistent. Those who have committed murders and other abominations in America and British Commonwealth nations are to be slaughtered, man, woman, and child, as specified in Ezekiel 9 verses 5 to 6 quoted earlier. Certainly, people in God's service who are to receive stricter punishment deserve the same punishment at the minimum for participating in worst abominations of Europe, their own members. Jesus said in Matthew 5:24, Assuredly I say to you, you will by no means get out of there, that is prison, till you have paid the last penny, meaning all the debts of the punishment they owe. This should be encouraging for all God's church members who have not participated in the murders and may be thinking of doing so. How can God protect me during the coming deadly civil war in the United States when both sides are heavily armed with deadly weapons? You must trust in God's promise. No one can protect himself and his family with any guarantee without God's protection. God has given us all the strongest possible evidence that he protects his own even today by protecting me through all the by now more than well over 1,000 attempts on my life in the past 60 years, including the more than 40 years in the United States and perhaps 30 to 40 attempts by the same individuals. Attempts were made by German masqueraders on German masquerader's life also, but God protected me throughout his life as well. So in part 5 video, I will offer advice to all the murderers in God's church from biblical examples on what lies ahead for them and what course of action they should take. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please continue to watch my videos on important world events, World War III watch, politics, international business, how Bible prophecy is playing an important role in world affairs, and advice on in-depth and health and medical problems, and much more for in-depth and insightful analysis. Please also subscribe to my YouTube and Facebook channels Unmasked Truth with Harmanjit Saini to view and get information on the latest feast videos.